How about just a general snapshot of where we're at with fertilizer markets?
Yeah, there's a lot of watch points. In fact, that's why I hit on the video this week was trying to kind of hit and say, here's what we're watching in the news. Nitrogen, obviously, the biggest story is still the Strait of Hormuz. Former Secretary of State Pompeo, he actually came out and said something we've been talking a lot about. He thinks that the Iranians are going to drag this thing out until the midterms. And I fully agree. That has an impact on the elections. And if they can sway this to the Democrat side, Trump spends the next 2 years just trying to fend off the tax the entire time. But the thing is, stinks. A lot of your nitrogen, a lot of your phosphate goes to that body of water. It's a huge impact. Still watching China, still watching the Russia-Ukraine war. Things are quiet right now in the fertilizer markets, and I'm not sure how much longer that lasts. I've been warning folks, and enjoy it while it's here. I think things are about to break loose.
Okay, when you say things are about to break loose, what do you think? What is your I know you can't predict the future, but just based on your expertise and your monitoring, what do you think?
From the nitrogen side on urea, I am watching the Brazilians very closely. Their imports have been a little bit behind their 3-year average. That is a lot of demand for them to catch up, and I think that buying wave could be something that starts to support the global marketplace. However, the bigger story is the Chinese have really slowed down their ammonium sulfate exports, and a lot of those tons have gone to Brazil. If Brazil can't get that ammonium sulfate from China, they probably can't get it from other people. They're going to replace it with urea. That's even more demand. And then I think once you start to get that ball rolling, all of a sudden I think the world starts to realize, hey, the strait has been impacting supplies. The lack of European production has been impacting supplies. And now we start this situation going into the fall, into the winter, where your nitrogen manufacturer around the world has a very solid sales book on. And that is a massive, massive win for those guys. Because when it comes to negotiation, they'll say, well, I want 5, $10 a ton higher than last business. And the buyer may sit there and say no. And they'll say, okay, great. I'll talk to you in a few weeks. I'm sold out. I don't have to sell you cheaper today. It's a great negotiation tool if you can put it in place.
What about supply in general of nitrogen? Are we okay?
I think we are okay for the moment. And I say that expecting that we will see nitrogen application rates down again. I think it's one of the big reasons this last spring, we didn't see anybody truly around the world come out and say, I cannot get the fertilizer that I need. And I think what you're going to find out when the data finally starts to kind of make its way through, who knows how long that will be. But I think what we're going to find out is that farmers around the world in most places scaled back their nitrogen and phosphate and potash application rates in response to the higher prices. Farmers did what they did. High prices cure high prices. I think that we'll get through this one okay, but I still think you're going to have to see that very similar situation. I think phosphate demand is going to be down markedly. I think nitrogen is going to be down a little bit, and 3 to 5% isn't massive, but 3 to 5% on the overall nitrogen market is a huge number. Potash is probably just going to buddy up with phosphate, and if they cut back on phosphate applications, I do get worried for potash.
With natural gas prices being a major factor in fertilizer production costs, what role do you think the energy markets are playing in this whole thing, Josh?
Very little. And I know that is probably going to be a surprise to most people. Well, you start to go around and look at the gas price in most places around the world where there's major manufacturing, it's not been impacted that much. The one place where we watch it very, very closely is the Europeans. We watch that Dutch TTF price very, very closely, almost daily, to get an idea of where they're looking because about 25% of their production is offline because of the high cost of that gas. Once they shut off the cheap flows from Russia, they've had to be reliant on higher priced routes to get their gas into place. And their production has remained about 75% of normal. So that's one place we do look at gas. When you look at North America manufacturers, Middle East, their gas is still extremely cheap. Russia, same thing. They don't need to worry about it. That is just a situation where the manufacturer makes more or less money because they're selling it at such a high cost to the rest of the world. Europe's the only place we're really concerned about it for the right now.
And Josh, at this point in time, are you starting to hear farmers looking at buying nitrogen ahead of next planting season, or are many of them trying to wait and seeing what this price looks like, or if there's any certainty coming?
I think it's a huge mix. I think that there is a group of farmers out there that have gone ahead and they've bought their anhydrous for the fall. I think some folks have already started to buy up some of their UAN for next spring. Same thing for urea. These values have dipped down. When you look at where we're at today on a lot of these prices, they are down remarkably from where they were in March and April. And so just from that perspective, it's one of those things that's like, well, yeah, it's not quite where I would think it would be historically, but it was also way up here just not that long ago. Let's just jump on those when we get the chance. And I think there's gonna be a lot of other farmers who look at it and say, this just does not make sense for my operation. If I plug those numbers into my spreadsheet, it's kicking out red numbers. That doesn't make sense. I'll wait and I'll see. It's a long time until spring. I couldn't even begin to tell you what the mixes are, but Yes, we've seen some demand on the farm side, but we've seen a lot of other people push back and say, nope, it's got to get better.
Do you happen to have any advice on how they can approach making these fertilizer decisions?
Number one, be unemotional. When you think about it, a lot of our bad decisions are made when we're angry, hyped up, pressed, whatever the case may be. Listen, these markets are tough. The grain markets are not very high compared to where we think they should be. The fertilizer prices are too high. The fuel costs, the seed costs, the chemical costs, the land price. It's hard to be a farmer today. And so when you go to market, you look at these numbers, you say, this is ridiculous. I'm mad. I'm upset. I'm whatever the emotion is. When it comes down to it, you still have to look at the opportunity. Get rid of the emotion as much as you possibly can and just take a good hard look at it. The market prices try and tell us a story every single day. It's our job to try and figure it out, but we've got to set aside that emotion, get to the base of it and say, hey, this is my opportunity. I'll jump on it. If it gets better, great. I'll do more. If it gets worse, I'm glad I did what I did.
I have another question for you here on sulfur. I've heard from the Fertilizer Institute that sulfur is kind of an underlying issue that we haven't talked a lot about. Have you seen anything on that and what may occur there as far as shortages?
That is why your phosphate price is so high, or it's a very, very large part of it. The Strait of Hormuz historically accounts for about half of the world's tradable sulfur supply. And when we look at the production of DAP and MAP, you've got two big variable cost inputs for that. One is anhydrous, and it's sulfur. The strait accounts for half of the world's tradable supply. Russia has also blocked their export flows. They're 17%. So right now, when we're looking at the tradable, not the overall scope of the sulfur market, but the tradable sulfur supply out there, two-thirds is missing right now, or two-thirds is being impacted. When Quan reruns the numbers and says, hey, here's what the cost is to produce a ton of DAP in the US marketplace. Today's sulfur cost alone is almost what the entire cost of producing a ton of DAP was back in summer of 2023. So as
Wow.
we look at it, these manufacturers, everybody's looking at the higher price and say, "Oh, they're making a killing." My role is just to look at the markets and tell people, "Here's what I think." The manufacturers of phosphate are not healthy right now. They are having to scale back production because the cost doesn't make sense. They're losing money, and also because a lack of inputs. If they can't get sulfur, they can't produce the product.
So the lack of inputs goes all the way up the pike, if you will.
Listen, this strait is something it has spider webbed out. It started with a very narrow point of view. And now all of a sudden we're talking more about the lack of gas that's flowing out. Well, why does that matter? Other nitrogen manufacturers around the world rely on those gas flows to feed their plants. India is a great example. They're one of the biggest manufacturers of urea in the world. And their production's been hurt because the gas isn't flowing through the strait, the lack of sulfur coming through there. So all these little weird markets that we've never really talked about because they've been normal and we didn't have to, now all of a sudden play a very, very big part. Like I said, right now the markets are calm. They're cool. They're collected. Prices are down. Don't let that lull you to sleep. As you start to look into the fall and the winter and the spring, if these things don't start to correct themselves, we could have a lot of turmoil in front of us.
And this kind of feeds right into this question. As we look for the 2027 crop year to arrive, what are some of the biggest fertilizer market trends do you predict there?
I think the biggest one that we're watching as we start to look, at least for the fall, is I think phosphate demand is going to be down pretty markedly. When you look at the price of phosphate versus the price of corn, that's always my comparison. This week is the third highest ever for this week. Last week was the second highest worst ever. Farmers are spending far more bushels of their hard-earned grain to pay for that phosphate, and I think they're feeling it at the checkbook. I think they're feeling it at the elevator, and they're saying, "Okay, I've got to make a change. If my soil levels are solid and I can reduce, I can skip. Perhaps I'm a fall guy and I can wait until spring." But I think this fall demand is going to be down substantially. I would not be surprised at all to see demand down 50% from normal. And honestly, the only reason I'm not a big a number is I'm not brave enough to sit there and throw out the number I really think it's going to be. I think farmers are going to push back and say, this just doesn't work. I won't use it. That's the biggest thing we're watching. I do get concerned if that farmer waits until spring on the phosphate, what that does to potash demand. That could be something that kind of pulls the rug out from underneath it. Nitrogen, you've got to have it to raise a crop. But Arlen and I were just having a conversation this morning about it. Think about a 5 to 10% cut. Let's just say we're an average corn acre, 250 pounds of actual nitrogen per acre. A 5 to 10% cut is 12 to 25 pounds of actual on that acre. Is that going to have an impact? Yeah, more than likely in some situations, some ground more than others. that you're gonna have bigger weather risk and things like that. I think farmers might make that decision. I'm gonna scale back just a little bit in hopes that maybe there'll be a better possibility in spring. At worst, we'll just deal with it.
Josh, anything else I missed asking you here today that you wanted to mention?
Not that I can think of. There's a lot of watch points, actually. Like I said, the video this morning I did, I tried to hit all the kind of big news watch points that we're watching. It's the Russia-Ukraine war, it's the Strait of Hormuz, it's European production, Chinese export programs. All of these things are global. And it's the same thing. Right now, it's hurting us. But it'd be the same thing like if the Brazilian corn crop, for example, was devastated and our price started to go up because of it. That's a win. That's a great thing. In this situation, it's kind of turned the screws on us. It's a tough situation.
Ugh, big topics, big news here today. Thank you so much, Josh. I appreciate it.
Anytime.